podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to Away the Podcast. It's Martin here, and today we're taking another trip into the rich and varied history of Sunderland Association Football Club, covering events that have taken place on the 9th to the 15th of June that have either directly or indirectly impacted the football club. And as always, I am joined by my three friends. First up, Chris Wynn. How are you, mate?
Hi, mate. Bunch of friends.
Well,
yeah.
Might be overreaching it, mightn't it?
Well, that's it. But we were talking about getting together and going around the blue plaques of the old grounds at some point. Should be good.
No, that sounds like a very good idea. I hadn't even heard of that. Never mind thought about it. So no, that's a good one.
Traditional Sunderland pub crawl, isn't it? Around the old football grounds.
Good stuff. And also with us, as always, is the king of the puns. It's Kelvin Beattie.
Morning. Nice to be here.
And last but not least, Andrew Smith. Last but not least, it's Andrew Smithson.
Some friend you, Martin. You can't even pronounce my name. Do you, mate?
He was going to cut that before you responded.
I can't now.
Sorry.
That is okay. Right, so we finish off our last one, Andrew, with a question that was probably a little trickier than the one that we finished the previous episode off with. So, do you want to give us a recap of those little hints that you dropped in and tell us a little bit about the person who you were leaning towards there?
Yeah, interesting fella. This one, a winger for Sunderland. He was born in 1933 and then signed for Sunderland in 1957. Martin, we bought him from Sheffield United. He won an England cap whilst at Sunderland. He scored our first goal outside of Division 1 when we were relegated. He had over 100 games for us, but as I said last time, he was also well known for his performances off the pitch. So who do we reckon, gents, for that one?
I had Don Revie.
Well, he was definitely famous for his behaviour off the pitch. Don Revie played at the same time, but this was Colin Granger, who is he didn't go down the management route like Don Revie. He was from what I gather, really talented singer. He was performed on lots of stages. He even had a record deal with HMV. So, I mean, there's kids growing up wishing they could either be a pop star or a footballer. Colin Granger thought, nah, I'll have a bit of both, please.
Just do both. It's a dream, isn't it?
Yeah. So, some fella by all accounts, and apparently a very good singer, so give him his due.
So, a bit like Chris Waddle and Glenn Hoddle then. They could do both, couldn't they?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. I'd love to hear all three of them working on Diamond Lights together. That would be that would be some cover song, I think.
He was better than them. You can still pick up the tracks that he had in the top 40 on U Music. He was a top 40 artiste. And he was another one. I was telling you last week, me mum thought Charlie Hurley was a handsome fella. Don't get us started about Colin Granger, I tell you, because there could have been divorce in our house over that one, I think.
Yeah, you might have to quickly describe to the youngins what the top 40 is, Kelvin.
Oh, you're joking. Are you?
No, I'm not.
Oh my God!
Well, they can Google that one, can't they?
They can Google
that one. But there's a book about Colin Granger, isn't it? And it's called The Singing Winger, which is obviously very apt.
Yeah, that was his nickname, and I think for somebody to have played for England and shared a bill with the Beatles, that's going to be a pretty decent read, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a pretty good rap sheet, isn't it?
He definitely hit the right note with our support, though.
Oh. First one of the day. Well done.
Number one. Number one on everyone's calendar.
Because he shared the bill with the Beatles actually on the 13th of June in 1963. So that also falls into this week in this sort of slightly tangential history of Sunderland. But yeah, a singing winger who apparently when you read up about him, he was kind of likened to Dennis Stewart in a way in terms of his playing style and the impact he made from the wing. So it's not a bad accolade as well. But now shared the same bill as the Beatles, which is a nice little thing a nice big thing to have. And look, there's so many of us think we can play football and think we can sing. And not many of us can do either. And he can do both. So fair play to him.
Maybe at the end of this pub crawl, one or two of us might break out into song and
hey,
see how close we are to...
Hey, you never know, do you?
I'll be disappointed if Kelvin doesn't, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, Kelvin, to be fair to you, Kelvin, you pointed out a piece that you did on Colin Granger for the Roker Report website back in June 2021, I think it was, when he passed away. Really good article. So if people are listening and thinking, "Oh, I wouldn't mind learning about this fella," I would dig that out. It's a really nice roundup of what he did.
Hey, when you think about singing footballers, right? Going off on a complete tangent here, but you talked about Diamond Lights with Waddle and Huddle in the late 80s, I think it was. There was two other football players around that time, probably the early 90s, who released singles and were on Top of the Pops. And again, you might have to Google Top of the Pops. Both of them were members of the England 1990 World Cup squad. Can you remember who the players were who recorded records?
Gaza, because Gaza did Fog on the Tyne.
Fog on the Tyne.
Yeah.
Almine.
Yeah.
See, you're already starting to sing, Martin.
Ooh.
I just remember the David Ginola version.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this a joke, or did he do that?
No.
I don't remember.
No. It was the Fulwell Ends version of Fog on the Tyne.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Trying to think who else. I mean, was it potentially Lineker?
I don't know if Gary Lineker laid down the track, but it was the song. I tell you, the song was called "Woolly Bully," which will give us.
Steve Bull.
Steve Bull recorded a record as well. So there you go.
Wasn't when he got called up to that squad in the 1990? Wasn't he playing in the third or the fourth division?
Third division. He was playing for Wolves in Division 3. And he got called up in a pre-World Cup tournament called the Rouse Cup, and England played Scotland and somebody else, and I can't remember who it was. But I think Steve Bull came on, because John Fashanu was playing for England at the same time. And Fashanu got his debut, and Steve Bull got his... I don't know if it was the debut, but it was very early caps. I think it was Bull's debut, and Bull scored against Scotland. And that got him his place to go to Italia 90.
He was always a good mover, Steve Bull.
Don't milk it, Kelvin. Don't milk it.
Hey!
Not even 10 minutes in.
Talking about World Cups, 4 years earlier than that, so the 86 World Cup, which was the Mexico World Cup, 9th of June, Peter Reid made his international debut as a sub for Ray Wilkins in a warm-up game. And obviously Reid went on to play in that World Cup. He was left chasing Maradona, wasn't he, when Maradona scored his second goal. And there was two other players. I tell you what, this is going to take ages tonight, isn't it? There was two other players with Sunderland connections who tried to get onto Maradona and couldn't in that move. Do you remember who they were?
Terry Fenwick?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Born in Seaham and Terry Butchett.
Correct, the two Terrys.
Well done.
On the 10th of June in 2005, another player who I think he wasn't international, but he should have been capped by England, Nyron Nosworthy. He joined Sunderland on free from Gillingham. While on the 11th of June, 1996, Alex Ray joined the club from Millwall for £1 million.
Yeah.
I think he became our joint record signing, did he?
No, he was our first £1 million signing, as in a £1 million signing, because David Kelly was based on the fact that we went up. So he wasn't
£1 million outlay.
Yeah, because Reedy apparently Reedy didn't want to pay Wolves $1 million, so he worked out the deal to pay 900,000 plus 100 more if we went up. Or it might have been probably Bob Murray, who didn't want to pay the full $1 million. So Alex Ray was our first £1 million signing, where that was the actual fee. Because Don Goodman was just lower than that, wasn't he? He was 950, I think. He might have been a little bit closer, but yeah, he was 950. So he was just short. David Kelly in the initial fee was just short, and obviously Alex and obviously Quinny broke that a few weeks later, 1.3. But you talked about us breaking our £1 million barrier in that summer, and that was the season. That was the summer that the Mags bought Shearer for 15, wasn't it?
It was. But yes, never mind about that. Because
sorry, just to bring the mood down. But
well,
it was a good summer because it was Euro '96. We'd just gone up, and the Mags had just blown the title, so it was a good. Summer.
Brilliant summer. It was my summer before going to university, so I had nothing to do. 18-year-old, nothing to do. It was class.
Yeah, I'd rather have Alex Ray as Alan Shearer.
Yeah,
well, Alex Ray was a better penalty taker. But for the first big thing that we're going to talk about today, we're going to go back to 1953, and the Scottish international goalkeeper called Jimmy Cowan joined the club. Now, Andrew, I've not heard a great deal about Jimmy Cowan before, so I am really interested to hear everything that you know about this fella.
Well, it's a good thing, because if you don't know who I'm talking about, I can say what I want and nobody can pull me up on it. You said there that on the 11th of June we spent big on Alex Ray. 11th of June 1953, what was that? Is that 43 years ago? Prior to Alex Ray, if my maths is correct?
Fast maths.
Yes. Well, on that date, we spent £16,000, which is a lot less than $1 million, but for the period was a lot of money, particularly for a goalkeeper. The reason we were happy to spend that on Jimmy Cowan was basically he was one of the highest rated goalkeepers in Britain in the time. He's since been put into the Scottish Hall of Fame. Between 1948 and 1951, he was Scotland's #1 goalkeeper. And when you consider he was playing at an unfashionable club such as Greenock Morton, that's a pretty big achievement. In total, he was there for around 10 years. Most of that time, he was in the top flight. So this is a goalkeeper with a really good reputation, lads. I don't know if any of you know the famous story from the 1948 Scottish Cup final. It's quite well known. It's quite infamous. Has that been brought to anyone's attention yet, or is this going to be a new one on yourselves?
I think it's a new one on me, certainly.
Yes. Well, I'm not going to pretend that I knew about this until I started researching Jimmy Cowan. Seemingly, the cup final in Scotland in 1948, it was against Rangers, and it went to a replay with over 133,000 fans there. Rangers won it because Billy Williamson shaped up to shoot. A photographer is on the sidelines. He's gone to get the photo, and apparently the bulb is what dazzled Cowan and caused the goal to go in. Because rather than, a bit like the beach ball all those years later, the goalkeeper's distracted. He doesn't quite know where he is, and this fella's been able to score past Cowan. So yeah, there was a bit of a fallout from that. He still, however, as I say, was a regular for Scotland, and in both 1949 and 1951, he's had fantastic performances seemingly at Wembley, which enabled Scotland to win 2 British Homes championships. I mean, were they similar to the Rouse Cup? Does anybody know what the format of the Rouse Cup was?
Well, I think it was very similar, where you've got, however, like 3 or 4 teams, and they'll play against each other. Then whoever's whichever two teams have got the most still play in the final or something like that. It's kind of a similar sort of thing.
Well, certainly in the 40s and 50s, it was a major event. So Cowan playing well and helping Scotland to good results at Wembley and winning those home championships, that's obviously going to mean he's a pretty popular fella around Scotland. So yeah, he's got this reputation. As for Sunderland, we've spoken before about how in the 50s we are not shy about opening up the checkbook. Morton had been relegated. They were unable to get back into the top flight. So I think that is what has prompted him to look elsewhere and consider Sunderland's approach.
So he signed for the club, highly rated goalkeeper. All sounds pretty rosy.
Yeah, it does. It does for the time being. He was brought in to replace a goalkeeper called Harry Threadgold, which is a fantastic surname. Threadgold had struggled a bit. So Bill Murray, nearly called him Bob Murray, but Bill Murray wanted to replace Threadgold. Obviously, Cowan's got this good reputation. Murray may have crossed paths with him at St Mirren. When Murray was still a player, he spent a period at St Mirren, and I can't quite work out the timings, but it's possible that he knew Cowan when he was first coming through. Regardless of that, he's since gone on to become Scotland's top goalkeeper, so Murray's well aware of him, with him being a Scot as well. He's previously been linked with Arsenal. In early June 1953, he's invited down to Sunderland to look around, have a look at the town. Morton at this point are in no way trying to push him out of the door. They're desperate to keep hold of Cowan, but he wants to try somewhere new. As I say, Murray is desperate for a goalkeeper to replace Threadgold. The deal was made official on the 11th of June, and what was quite interesting about it was the thing that seems to have swung the deal is Cowan had other business interests. He apparently ran a pub at the time. He wasn't keen on moving away and giving up this secondary income. So Sunderland, as part of his deal, agreed to get him a secondary job as a physical instructor, believe it or not. So this fella didn't just sign as a player. He was lined up with another job to supplement his income. Obviously, when you're going down that route and trying to find somebody an extra job, you're expecting him to do well. But as you say, after all of that, Martin, he comes along, his debut, he goes and concedes 5 as we lose to Charlton. And then in his 4th game, he does it again somehow. He manages to concede 5 at a home loss to Manchester City. So yeah, 4 games in at the start of the 1953-54 season, and he's been had 5 put past him twice, which is not what you want at a new club. Even Charlie Hurley, with his poor start last week, might shake his head at that one.
Hey, when you look through the games of that season, say you get beat 5-3 away at Charlton on the first game of the season, 2-1 away at Newcastle the second game, 3-2 against Wolves next game. So there's no clean sheets in sight here. Concedes 5, concedes 3, concedes 3, concedes 4, concedes 6, concedes 3, concedes another 5 away at Burnley. And you go through it, and it wasn't until a game against Aston Villa on the 1st of January 1954 that the team kept the first clean sheet of the season, which is pretty remarkable. Never mind the physical instructor, he should have been a physiotherapist. He could have massaged his bad back, couldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, flipping heck, can you imagine if next season back in the Premier League, what was it? You said it was January before we got a first clean sheet?
1st of January, the first clean sheet that we got that season in the league.
Yeah, I think if we go that long without getting a clean sheet next season, I might I can imagine there'll be a few people a bit concerned about that. So bless him, that is not a good start, to put it mildly.
To be fair to him, Ted McNeil was a goalkeeper, and he played a few of those games. And the game against Burnley where we conceded 5, McNeil was in goal. So I did Jimmy a disservice there. But there's still plenty of goals conceded that season.
Yeah, but I would say though, if you look at the final league tables around that time, like the goals just flew in generally, because if you look, we I'm looking in 53, 54, we scored 80 goals or something, and we finished low down in the table and stuff. So I mean, the goals just flew in generally. I remember was there a famous Boxing Day where there was like 6 on average, it was like 6 or 7 goals in every game, because they were just basically saying all the players were still pissed off the day before.
It was like reading out the list of rugby results, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was none of this Pep Guardiola keeping it tight and keeping possession of the football and not conceding, or the old George Graham back four, nothing like that back then.
Now, in total, we conceded 89 goals that season in 42 games. So you're going to more than two goals a game, which suggests there's a problem somewhere.
Well, it sounds, again, my quick maths, if you're conceding 2 goals a game on average, and in some games you're losing 5 or 6 goals, that suggests on the other weeks, we're absolutely rock solid. So again, sublime to the ridiculous. If we manage to do that next season, you're going to have a few people asking questions, aren't you? Kind of figuring out what's got on there.
Certainly, but even like Wolves won the league and they conceded 56. So, Sky Sports would have paid a fortune for the rights to cover a season like that, wouldn't it? Be goals flying in all over the place.
Not bad. You mentioned there Ted McNeil, who was his understudy. There were a few times when Cowan dropped out and Ted McNeil was brought in. And I have to be honest, I did wonder, in the papers it was given as various injuries for Cowan. I did wonder if that was one of those cover-up, when you try and protect somebody and you don't want to say he's been dropped from the team. You either say he's been rested or he's picked up a knock in training. However, when I did a bit more reading, it does turn out that Cowan, maybe he was overdoing it with the physical instructor job. He did actually admit to Johnny Mapson, who was another Sunderland goalkeeper who was on the books. He did apparently tell him off the record that, I am playing with a pretty severe knee injury here. So those injuries perhaps were legitimate, and maybe the reason he's conceding so many is because he's playing virtually on one leg. We've had plenty of goalkeepers who had, chocolate wrists, but chocolate wrists and one leg is not a good combo for a goalkeeper, sadly.
But he was 27, I think, or just turned 28 when he signed. So it's not as if we're talking about an old goalkeeper here. We're talking about somebody who is, coming in the prime of the career, really. Plays 28 games for us, and he only plays 6 games or so after that. He goes to Third Lanark, and that's it. So it does suggest he had some injury issues at the very least, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've said there 28 times he played for us. His final game for Sunderland was a 4-3 loss at Liverpool, which, like has been mentioned, plenty of goals flying in. It might not sound too bad, but when you consider Liverpool finished bottom that season, conceding 4's a problem. Injuries clearly did affect him. He stayed on the club's books for a couple of years. The following season, Willie Fraser came in, so we went and signed another Scottish goalkeeper. Willie Fraser became number 1. When he was unavailable, we played a youth team graduate called Leslie Dodds. So you've got this Scottish international goalkeeper on the books at the club, not even getting a look in. So much so that he actually moves back to Scotland and is what is deemed on call to Sunderland. So apparently he said, right, I'm on contract with yous. I'm heading back home. If you need us, give us a ring and I'll pop down. But yeah, that to me sounds like somebody who is nursing ongoing problems. I think, to be fair to him as well, he's still got his business interests in Scotland. So he's admitted that he's got independent means. Now, if you've got a bad leg injury and you've got businesses that are doing well, bringing in money, do you really want to risk hurting yourself further? And maybe if you've got this reputation as one of the best goalkeepers in the country, but you can't quite meet those standards anymore, maybe, don't know, maybe you're not playing is not as important a thing to you as it might have been, perhaps. It's a shame, nonetheless.
It is, and I think in the context of the time, the wages and salaries that professional players were paid were pretty much on par with what you can, or less for a number of jobs, weren't they? So it wasn't if he was giving up multi-million pounds worth of contracts to go and run the pub somewhere. It was all very kind of on a level playing field. But the Willie Fraser stuff's interesting because we signed him towards in the middle of that season. So the shortly after we kept our first, or a couple of months after we kept our first clean sheet of the season, Fraser's signed. He makes his debut, and there must be a story here, Andrew. I don't know what it is. He makes his debut in a 3-0 away win at Spurs. So given our defensive struggles that season, new goalkeeper signs, keeps a clean sheet away at Spurs at White Hart Lane. Next game, Jimmy Cowan comes back in. He plays against West Brom at home, we win, and then he plays this Liverpool game, and then he's gone. So there's another little story there somewhere for somebody to uncover about what went on there, because on face value, that seems illogical, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's your perfect debut, isn't it? You come in, keep a clean sheet in a big win. You go into the changing rooms and it's thanks very much, but we're going to drop you again. That's going to be a bit of pill to swallow, I think.
After the Villa game, we kept a clean sheet at home to Cardiff because we won that game 5-0, getting plenty of goals flying around. Yeah. But yeah, we went into that Spurs game, the 34th game of the season, having only kept 2 clean sheets all season. New goalie comes in, makes it 100% record of clean sheets for himself. 3rd clean sheet of the season. Sit next one out, mate. All right.
And another thing to bear in mind there, just looking at the outfield players. I mean, we're buying lots of so-called superstars, aren't we? And when you read around that time, it seemed like these were all individually really good players, but struggling to gel as a team, So, Bill Murray probably had his hands full trying to get the best out of the super individuals that he'd brought in, Anderson, Aitken, Wright, Shackleton, Ted Purden. There's a whole host of Hudgel, whole host of stars there that you're trying to manage. I would imagine it would be a difficult dressing room that to sort of manage and get the best out of them. Yeah, difficult.
Well, Trevor Ford started the season, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. 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 That's very, very true. And I think when we're talking about high-scoring games, that suggests, as you say, a team of individuals with talents. Some weeks are able to turn it on. As Martin said, there's been a couple of games where we have kept clean sheets. But if you're failing to gel, doesn't matter if you're able to score 2 or 3 goals off the cuff. You might still lose games.
That's it's an aside, but that's a great story. The Trevor Ford and Len Shackleton's relationship. Yes. Apparently, they did not get on.
That's one for another episode after that, I think, isn't it? It's,
yeah.
Probably warrants
to look out for that one
podcast on its own. Interestingly, connecting some of the dots in that Charlton game at the start of the season, Billy Elliott made his debut for us, and obviously we talked about Billy Elliott a bit last week in terms of his position, before Ken Knighton got the job at Sunderland in the late 70s. And on the 12th of June, 1981, Alan Durbin was appointed as manager. So Alan Durbin took over from Knighton, oversaw 130 games, 37 wins. And again, Chris spoke to David Snowden about his new book recently. The other book that David Snowden wrote about the Alan Durbin period at Sunderland is another really good read and very informative. And I learned a lot with that one, because that was before my time of watching the club. And on the 12th of June in 1902, a really kind of tragic thing happened. So we'd won the league, obviously going into June, going into the end of the season. And our captain, Matthew Ferguson, 29 years old at the time, played 181 games for the club, passed away from pneumonia, apparently. So that's, obviously quite a big thing. I think it's kind of gets not spoken about as much as it possibly should do.
You're dead right. Funnily enough, well, maybe not funny is the right term. Cowan actually passed away quite young as well. He was only 41, 42, I think. So, 15 years after signing for Sunderland, he passed away after an illness in hospital. And Ferguson, you're right. He is a player who was a consistent performer for Sunderland in a very good team. He was a captain. He's part of the title winners. And yet just a few weeks later, he passes away with illness, sadly. It's a tragic story. And you're dead right. Not one that gets much coverage these days.
No, it doesn't. And, we talked last week, didn't we, about Tom Watson, the famous Sunderland manager while he was at Liverpool. He died, very similar sort of circumstances as well. So I think it's probably a little bit more common in those days, but still all very sad. On the 12th of June in 1990, however, there was some good news for all Sunderland supporters, because very unusually, in the middle of June, Sunderland somehow managed to claim promotion in a courtroom and not on a football pitch, Chris.
They did, and I think I think I'll start with this by just saying we will go through a lot with this, but if you want the absolute detail, I think you need to go back to the Bill Bradshaw pod that we put out. I'm trying to think, maybe something like that. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, we recorded it years ago, and for lots of reasons, it didn't go out for a long time, but it did go out eventually, and I'm very grateful for that, because absolutely unbelievable story how we got hold of that. I mean, just to kind of try and summarize the whole story of the promotion, because it was, I mean, we now, I think it's just people kind of accept, we got beat, and the FA kind of decided something and we went up. But it went back kind of way before that final, because Bill Bradshaw, and like I said, the detail is fantastic that he goes into. But essentially, he got the nod from someone at Swindon that something wasn't quite right about the way they were doing things about a year before this all played out. So it went on for a long, long time. And it began with a story or an accusation that the powers that be at Swindon Town were placing bets on their side. And specifically, I think it was an FA Cup third round tie at Newcastle the season before. And it was when Newcastle were a struggling first division side. Swindon were a decent second division side at the time. But Newcastle won 5-0. And there was an accusation of someone who was not happy on the inside with how Swindon Town were being run, wasn't happy that they weren't doing things in the right way. And in the end, Bill Bradshaw got this evidence of this betting slip, and that's how his kind of headline started in the papers. But then they said the source that he had said there's more, and it ended up spiraling into, the accusations of how they were paying players. That there was one wage on the books, and then they were paying them the rest, kind of cash in hand, as it were. And it went some way to explaining why they had the likes of Fraser Digby, David Kerslake, Duncan Shearer, I think was there at the time, Colin Calderwood, Alan McLaughlin, who we spoke to on a podcast in the past, and very sadly isn't with us anymore. A fantastic fella and absolutely great to talk to. But it did explain why they all played for Swindon. So this was going on throughout the whole season. Bill Bradshaw said his lawyers were telling him to term it as irregular payments rather than illegal payments, so he didn't get into trouble with the lawyers. But Martin, at the time when we were talking about this, Martin did a lot of digging through the archives, and there was dates set for hearings all the way through the season that kind of ended up getting pushed back and kicked down the road. And it ended up, obviously, Swindon doing really well and making the playoffs. And I think at this point, as Bill said, he realised what might be at stake if Sunderland beat Newcastle in the semi-final, which, by the way, was only decided on the final day of the season, when we were beaten by a very good Oldham Athletic side under Joe Royle. They were a fantastic cup side at the time. And Newcastle, who were beaten by Middlesbrough on the final day of the season. So there were rumours flying around, especially within football, that people had an inkling that the winner of that semi-final could potentially go up, but there was nothing official. Now, in the end, Swindon played us off the park, and we had Tony Norman to thank that it wasn't a rugby score on the day. But it was after this point that the fun began, because that final was at Wembley. We got beat 1-0. Gary Bennett own goal in the end separated the two sides. So the final was on the 28th of May. 9 days later, on the 6th of June, there was a League Management Committee hearing. Now, this found Swindon Town guilty, and initially they were relegated from being promoted to the top flight to then going down to the third division. Now, on appeal, this was reduced so that they just weren't promoted rather than being relegated to the third division. And just an aside, the real losers of this was actually Tranmere Rovers, because they were promoted because they got demoted to the third division, and in the end that was overturned. So Tranmere weren't actually promoted in the end. But that was just the initial decision that Swindon were found guilty and were going to be demoted. What happened after this was basically a PR campaign from all sides, because the decision then had to be made on what would happen next. So it began with Newcastle staking their claim, and you won't be surprised that a Newcastle MP lobbied in Parliament to say that Newcastle United should go up, which we've heard a couple of times since.
I think it's going to change.
Yeah, exactly. But they finished 6 points better off. And we've got to remember in the time as well that the playoffs had only been going for a few years. So I think this was the fourth or potentially fifth season the playoffs have been going. And this was the very first season that the final was at Wembley, Martin?
It was, but I think they'd been in a different format previously. So in the previous years, and I actually really like this idea, but the playoffs were two clubs from the top flight playing off against two clubs who finished third and fourth, I think, in the division below. I remember listening to Chelsea versus Middlesbrough. It might have been that season before on the radio. But they were great games. You had the teams who just finished above the relegation zone playing against the teams who just finished outside the promotion places. And great sort of format for deciding that. But I think they then went to have the four teams playing off against each other, and there's a home and away leg for the final.
Yeah.
And then this was the first time that they'd done the format that we now know, where you've got the semis, home and away, and then you've got a one-off final at Wembley, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was a big deal as well, because it was when they went for this, they obviously went for the final at Wembley. But I was just going to say the original format, Martin. I mean, it wasn't great playing Gillingham, to be fair.
I deliberately stayed clear with that, mate.
And the fact that they got extra time to score the extra away goal, which we ended up getting beat on, was genius formatting, wasn't it? But anyway, so it's like I said, it started with this PR campaign. Newcastle MPs lobbied, and I think because, as I said, Newcastle finished 6 points better off, and there was always this, because of the playoffs being a new thing, there was always this thing. Well, if we finish above them, why do we have to play these teams and go up because we finished third? And there was a quote from a Newcastle general manager at the time, and I can't remember what the guy's name is. I think you got it in your piece.
Russell Cushing.
That's it. And he said the rules only provide that the club which wins the playoff competition is promoted in third place. The club which won the playoff is now entitled to take its place in the first division. Therefore, the league should revert to the original process, whereby the third club in the table is promoted. In that case, Newcastle United should be promoted as they finish 6 points clear of the team in fourth place. So they were lobbying to be promoted in Swindon Town's place. The other side, other than Sunderland, who were pushing for this, was Sheffield Wednesday, because they were relegated in the third spot in the top flight. And I'm not sure if any of you remember this, but I think it's on YouTube somewhere. Ron Atkinson ended up appearing on a World Cup edition of Saint and Greavesy because the World Cup Italian 90 had kicked off by this point. And I think they were asking him questions about England and whatever, but he started talking about how his Sheffield Wednesday side shouldn't be relegated from the top flight. And I think they were trying to maneuver him back onto the topic of the World Cup. But he was having none of it, and he was saying Sheffield Wednesday shouldn't be relegated. But obviously at the same time, we were pushing our case that we should be promoted to the top flight. And it was about 3 days before the hearing where they decided, which was the 13th of June, which we're talking about. Bob Murray told the Journal, and this was in your piece as well, Martin. So again, as Andrew said, those Kelvin's piece about on the previous topic was on the website. Martin wrote about this on this day. Bob Murray told the Journal, the league have no option but to promote us. It's quite clearly a promotion issue, and we are without doubt the club with the best claim on that place. The rules are quite clear. 3 teams are relegated from the first division, and Sheffield Wednesday were one of those. Newcastle cannot have a claim. You cannot stop the season 95% of the way through it. The season has to run its full duration. That includes the playoffs, and Newcastle were beaten in those playoffs by us. Now, that's interesting that Bob Murray said that, because I think he said since that he didn't know for sure, but he had hints, and we'll go into it when we'll go back through it. But the only hint he said he'd had was that someone from the FA gave him the nudge and said, "Don't lose against Swindon." But he claims that was the only nudge. But we can go back into that, because on the 13th of June, it was decided that Sunderland would be promoted to the top flight. And in the days before everyone wanting to be the first to know things, news actually took time to filter out from these things. And we've spoken to some people, and Gary I was actually, I think he said he was in the Metro Centre when he found out, probably on, what was it? I'm trying to think, those radio rentals where they had all the TVs in the front of the window or something like that. But I remember I was sat with my dad, and I've told Martin this story before, but I was sat with my dad, and we found out because we were looking on teletext at the time, and that the headline came up that Sunderland, it was official that Sunderland were promoted. And I obviously started celebrating as a young'un that we were promoted to the top division. We hadn't been in the top division, obviously, for quite some time at this point, getting relegated in 85. And I was celebrating, and I looked at my dad, and he just rolled his eyes and looked at me and said, "We'll only come straight back down."
He was right.
And yeah, so that was the backstory. But we ended up in Division 1, and yeah, I mean, you could potentially say it was too soon, and as one of these that you're not going to not take it when he comes along. But maybe Dennis Smith, if he was analysing everything, would have liked another year or so or something to build this team. But yeah, and we kind of went through the back door, if you like.
Football's never as sort of linear as that, is it? You can never kind of predict how it would have gone with another season. But I remember I was at school on this day, and we used to get the bus back from school back to Black Hill, and got in the school bus, number 7 bus, going from Lanchester to Black Hill. Went on the upstairs of the double decker, and a lad called Phil Johnson, who was a year older than me, and his dad Tommy was a great bloke, a big Sunderland supporter. He's our football manager as well for our Sunday team. But Johnson just goes, "We've got promoted." I'm like, "What?" I don't know how he found out in the middle of school, because obviously, there's no, obviously it must be on the radio or something. He must have, a teacher probably told him, a teacher who supported Sunderland probably told him. But I never worked out where Johnson heard it from, but he told me. And then I couldn't wait to get home, because I wanted to tell me mum and dad when I got home. And obviously they'd heard. I don't know about you, Chris. I had no even, it was just completely out of the blue. I didn't have any understanding of the court cases. I was
No.
11 or 12-year-old at the time. I didn't have any understanding of things going on. I hadn't read any of this stuff or picked up on any of the stuff in the papers. And I just, we got beaten in the playoff final. I'd been gutted by it. But this was a fortnight after the playoff final.
Yeah. Well, as we've established, Martin, I'm a little bit younger than you. So I was even less aware of it than you were, because I just remember getting beat off Swindon and being absolutely devastated that we weren't going up, and just kind of accepting it and not thinking that anything else would happen.
Kelvin, you must remember this in every sort of...
I do, yeah. So I was at Wembley for that game. We were absolutely turned over. I think we've talked about the game itself. I think Smithy got his tactics wrong on the day. They had turned us over. They hadn't. You're right as well about the unbelievable players they had in their side.
Team.
Alan McLaughlin on the day for me was head and shoulders the best player on the park for me that day. Well, I tell you what I do remember, and it's strange. I've always meant to go back and speak to we used to go to football with a priest, a local curate. He was from Sunderland, actually, fanatical Sunderland fan, and we went to Wembley with him, and everybody was gutted at the result. I think not at getting beat, it was just after the excitement of knocking Newcastle out, to roll into Wembley and play so badly was so disappointing. It wasn't about not going up. I was just, we've rolled in here again, and the last time I was here was 1985. And for both those games, the team that turned up was the supporters. We were brilliant on both of those occasions, but our team didn't quite show up. So very, very disappointing. We're coming back down the road. I'm driving the minibus, and the priest sitting beside me, and he just leant across and said to me, "This isn't finished, I said, "How do you mean?" He says, "Just keep your eye on the papers, on the press. I don't think Swindon are going to be going up." And that was all he said to us. I thought, where's he getting? Much later on, when it all bottomed out, I thought, where did he get that information from?
Had to work with a big man, eh?
Yeah.
I see.
Well, I was going to say, Kelvin, you mentioned the tactics that day, and we went through this a bit again with Bill Bradshaw, but because we had a problem on the left-hand side in the two games against Newcastle. Colin Pascoe had been injured from the back end of the season. And then we had Paul Hardiman and Agbula on that left-hand side in the first leg. And then obviously Paul Hardiman launched John Burridge's head into the forward end and got himself suspended for the second leg. And then he put Warren Hawke in because Colin Pascoe was still struggling. And then for the final, I think he put Pascoe in, who must have been 50% fit or whatever. But not only that, he tried to match them up with the Diamond, which would never played all season. And he suddenly sprang this on the team at Wembley, and Swindon just ripped us apart.
What I remember, especially within 20 minutes of the game, I couldn't figure out what Gabbiadini and Gates were doing. They seemed to be almost in their penalty box, and...
Well, Marco got cropped early on.
Yeah, Calderwood came through the back of Gabbiadini after 15, 20 minutes, and that was him done for the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
he couldn't run after that.
Just
and the other thing the players said to Kelvin, you'll probably remember this, but they said it was a roasting hot day.
It was. We were bare chested in the.
but
everybody
it probably played into Swindon's hands, because under our dealers, they were actually one of the first sides to really keep the ball, weren't they?
Keep the ball, and that's what we couldn't get the ball off them. They were very, very good at it. Yeah. And just another thing I thought when you were speaking about this, Chris, was I think Dennis Smith would have liked another season in the second division just to just to get his team organised and, to build the team a bit stronger.
Well, you touched on those two Newcastle games, Kelvin and Andrew. You come in on this if you want, but you think about beating Newcastle, and now we go back to that Newcastle game, and we're like, oh yeah, beat them 2-0, and we still talk about that now. The Gates Gabardini, Martin was saying about the Christmas card the season after, and all this sort of stuff. Would that be as big if this decision wasn't made and we didn't end up going up?
I think so. It's
Even if we'd ended up playing them the season after?
Yeah, I think so. It was just, it's an iconic game. And I think, it's impossible to say, isn't it? Because time changes your perception on things. But at the time, I don't think you can kind of overstate how big a deal that was locally, how big a game that was.
I think the pitch invasion perhaps give it a bit of infamy as well.
Yeah.
So I think it would always be remembered. Kelvin, you talked about your pastor there and kind of foreseeing Sunderland going.
Oh, you talking about food?
No. The vicar. So he obviously knew.
Where's he going with this one?
No. He obviously knew that we had risen again. He could
absolutely. Yeah.
But so he obviously saw that happening. Just touching back on the confirmation of promotion, and I love those stories about how you had to hear it on the grapevine because you didn't get it popping up on your phone. Is my memory correct? It was either the same day or the day after the club were opening up a club shop in Jackie White's. So you had this bizarre situation where Dennis Smith and Viv Busby were toasting promotion with champagne in the bridges.
Don't think so, because I asked Dennis Smith on the podcast and he said he was just out and about when he found out, because he said that they didn't kind of celebrate or anything.
I remember that photo though.
It might have been after.
Yeah, like good time in the next day. Now, I love Jackie White's. I love the bridges. I've been in, as it happens, I've genuinely been in both this week. I don't know quite how I would have reacted if I was walking along and there's Regis Lebris having a glass of champagne celebrating promotion. I used to love that shop. Every time my mum took me into town, my mum used to just let me wander over there, and she used to go and do our shopping and come and basically pick us back up. But the other thing was, interestingly, around a week before this, and I've put this on the site recently for an On This Day. I think it might have been last week. I can't remember. But it was interesting. Leading up to this, there was like a big meeting with the FA where all the club owners went there, and they were discussing what might happen in terms of the league, because what they were considering doing was increasing the amount of teams in the top flight to 22 from 20. Now, it's interesting because Bob Murray, or at least it wasn't official if we would go up or down or whatever, but I suppose either way it would have suited us. But Bob Murray was lobbying that only 2 got relegated the season after, and more came up from the first division. So obviously it was in his best interests to lobby for that, because it was going to help us either way. And as it turned out, that's how the vote went through. He was also lobbying for more money from the TV deals. And in the end, kind of these two things got kind of voted in. But it was interesting that this happened a week before. And you're wondering that he's already gone to the FA with this cloud hanging over them, and they're discussing league formats and how many teams are going to be in each division, when actually they haven't yet decided what's happened and what's going to happen next with those teams. So you wonder, they must have had some sort of conversation with somebody a week before to kind of hint or to say this might happen, because it's kind of ridiculous that it kind of goes into the middle of June that you've got clubs not knowing what division they're going to be in the next season.
And it's interesting when you kind of read things about this, and also the conversations that we've had with players who were involved and other people who were involved in it. because a lot of them kind of say, "Oh, we didn't have a clue really about what was going on," all that sort of stuff. I've found something on the Sunderland Echo site. I think it was published about 5 or 6 years ago. But Gordon Armstrong had said, "I remember Kevin Dillon coming in after we beat Newcastle and congratulating us on promotion because their chairman had said we were already up." So then, if you look at the all the protestations and all that sort of stuff publicly afterwards, it seems everybody was kind of expecting this behind the scenes. He said action was being taken against Swindon, and they certainly wouldn't be going up and might not even be in the second division next year. Gary Bennett said everybody knew, even before a ball was kicked, that there were issues with Swindon. We didn't even know if they would be allowed to play in the playoffs, and then they were, but there was an investigation going on. So that's got to have played into your psyche going into that playoff final.
Yeah, but if you look at how Swindon Town played and their celebrations after, you get the feeling they didn't think that.
And I tell you what, I remember walking out of Wembley in my beautiful blue Hummel away shirt. Me, my mum and dad and my sister went to the game. And I remember, obviously you're walking out, you're devastated. I vividly remember the Swindon Town fans, this group of Swindon Town fans rolled the windows down and they're going, we're going up, you're not, for ages at us. And when I heard that news, I just thought, oh, we are. you bastard.
And did you run straight down to Jackie White's to get yourself another blue top to celebrate?
Oh, yeah. I love that. You know what? A complete tangible. I love that blue away shirt. I think the new season shirt is going to be kind of a retro or a new version of it, isn't it? But obviously that shirt I had when I was 11 or 12 didn't quite fit me when I got to mid-30s. So I bought one. I bought one off eBay. And I've never told my wife how much it cost, and I wouldn't. But I bought one off eBay, and it said extra large. So that's about right. It said, "Please bear in mind this is 1990s extra large, and not the 2019 extra large or whatever it is." I've never been able to put it on. If I did put it on, I probably wouldn't get it off. I'd have to ply it off. It's been in a box in the eaves of our house ever since. And she's like, "What are you doing with all those football shirts?" And I'm like, "Oh, priceless, them, man."
Literally.
Yeah. Never been worn because I can't.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just waiting for my lad to grow into it, and he'll be in that in a couple of years' time. He'll be right.
Well, yeah.
But it's funny because if you again with Bill Bradshaw, going back to that podcast, like I said, this had been going on all the time, but he'd actually been, for his investigation, he'd been knocking on the doors of players who played for Swindon, and he mentioned one of them was Chris Kamara, and they chuckled about it years later when they worked together on Sky Sports, because he had to knock on their doors and ask them questions about it, and they said they were quite, they're respectful and knew what he was doing, but they just said no comment. But if you look at what they were actually doing, they were basically illegally building a squad because they couldn't pay the wages that those players wanted. The like David Kerslake, went on, didn't he go on to play for Spurs? Colin Calderwood, big money move to Spurs. They had a crack inside, and there was no way, because Swindon Town came up from the third or fourth division, they ended up bouncing up, and the way they did it was completely wrong, and they deserved to be punished for it. In the end, it was deemed that the initial punishment was too much. But the only way they could have gotten those players and paid them the amount that they would have gotten at a bigger club where they should be playing at the time was by paying them under the counter, essentially.
There's an illegal payment being made, but who's it gone to, Chris Kamara?
do we think
allegedly?
Allegedly. Well, it's not, isn't it?
Another one for the Roker Report legal team to have to check over. do we think?
Gav, by the way.
Yeah. Keep Gav busy. Do we think you've mentioned there, Martin? You've got the Swindon fans being sarky with you, leaning out the car, shouting at you. Which, by the way, what are you doing, shouting at a bunch of family supporters of another team? But the players as well, they celebrated as if they thought they were up.
Oh, absolutely, do I?
Do we think that they had heard the rumours, but had convinced themselves, now we're going to get away with this? Or are they maybe thinking, lads, you can't impose any sanctions on us because we're not the only club doing it? I mean, in the 50s, when Sunderland got done for illegal payments, there was a suggestion that they were being made an example of.
Yeah.
There must have been a reason why Swindon's players and fans at that time thought, we're going to get away with this.
I think they gambled on going up, Andrew.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
He's just done you.
Well, hey, maybe they did. Maybe they thought once we're in the top division, the money's coming in. We can then
Andrew's
cover our
turn this week.
tracks.
Andrew's turn this week.
Well, I mean, one thing what I read about was they were really shocked because actually at the time, the people who were alleged to have done this were no longer at the club.
Right.
Lou Macari had been sanctioned for it, and actually he ended up losing his job at West Ham because he'd moved to West Ham, and because he'd been found guilty, West Ham wanted nothing to do with it, so they ended up sacking him because they said, well, not having someone who's been found guilty of not doing things the right way, so he got sacked from West Ham. The directors who were involved, they also were removed from the club. So what the new people who were come in, but actually, interestingly, later I did see Ozzy Ardiles was fined about £1,000 for something that he'd eventually got found guilty of at Swindon, which was interesting. But these ones that they've got found guilty of here, they fully expected a financial penalty or something along. They didn't expect a sporting penalty. So they didn't expect the football club to be punished in terms of where they'd gotten to or where they got to. But I think when the FA looked at it, they said, well, actually, you have now got your club to the top flight by illegal means. And I think if they hadn't gone up, I think it would have just been a fine. I don't think they would have done a football punishment.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a few reasons, isn't there? I think, as Chris says, in terms of the personnel who were there and the team that were there and the managerial people that were there at the time, they weren't the people who were involved in all this, so they probably thought it's not going to impact us directly. There's probably another school of thought in terms of they've left it so long to make any sort of decision on this whatsoever. If they were going to kick us out, they would have kicked us out before the playoffs started. Yeah. Which they potentially should have done, really. And then thirdly, even if they did think something was going on, they think, we've got to win this now to make this decision really hard for them. So there's different levels of potential motivation depending on how much people knew. But the biggest thing to come out of all of this was that the fact that we went up, it gave birth to possibly the best ever TV advert for season tickets at a football club that the world has ever seen. Can you remember it?
No, I can't remember this.
No. Oh, can you remember it, Kelvin?
No.
Yeah.
Remember, I was living in Scotland at the time.
Oh,
so
it was on Tyne Tees all the time, and it had a song. And I'm not going to sing it because, unlike Colin Granger, I can't sing. But it was like, get your season tickets now. Get your season tickets now. It was like, Sunderland are back in the first division. It had all this like line over it, and they must have like rattled it out over the course of a lunchtime. But it must be, somebody must have it on YouTube somewhere because it was brilliant. It was classic.
No.
It used to come on every night on Tyne Tees.
Well, interestingly, just quickly, you mentioned if the decision that maybe should have been made as soon as the season finished was Swindon just not allowed to be playing the playoffs. That would have meant West Ham would have been playing in the playoffs instead of them. But the other thing I do remember is for a long time, up on the Wearmouth Bridge, it had welcome back to Division 1 or Div 1 or something for ages at the time. And I think there's probably pictures of it knocking about still because but you saw the old yellow stagecoach busways buses going past with welcome back to Division 1 and stuff.
Fair play to the PR department because they've got that sign up on the bridge. They've knocked out that advert Martin's talking about. So they obviously knew something was in the pipeline. They've got everything lined up.
If you've seen the advert, you wouldn't say that, Andrew.
Is it bad? I tell you what,
it's brilliant. But
yeah, please, and if somebody does know that one, please send it our way because I'm keen to see it. Just talking about like the signage on the bridge and that. Has anybody noticed the Edward Thompson print works behind the Roker end at the stadium? The club have put this massive banner that just says, "We are back." Absolutely fantastic. No adverts this time on Time Tees, I'm afraid, but that's our equivalent sign this time. It looks the part.
Well,
we'll have to look out for that when we come over soon.
Now we will have to get a photo. That was on the 12th of June 1990. Paul Bracewell had come back to the club for his second spell. It was a year before that, wasn't it?
No,
so
it was in promotion season.
1989. So that's just early in that season. He'd come back. So he'd come back, and Bracewell had left Sunderland for Everton in 83.
Yep.
Gone to Everton, became an England national. Had terrible injury troubles after getting crocked by Billy Whitehurst in the game at St James's Park. Made a comeback. He'd actually played in the FA Cup final against Liverpool in 1989. But quite surprisingly, he was let go. I think Stuart McCall came on in that final and scored 2 goals as sub, didn't he? And then Stuart McCall kind of really cemented his place in the Everton team. Was Colin Harvey the manager then? I think he was, wasn't he? Colin Harvey was manager. But Dennis Smith and Howard Kendall and Colin Harvey all had good relationships. Paul Bracewell obviously knew Dennis Smith from Stoke. Bracewell comes back on loan, initially on a month's loan from Everton. Makes his second debut for the club in a 2-1 win against Middlesbrough at home, off the top of my head. And he then goes on and pretty much plays the whole season. You know, for a player who'd been injury prone and had injury struggles, he'd played the whole season. Before he actually signed for us, before he became permanent, there was rumours Dennis Smith had to sell to raise funds for him, and Newcastle were linked with him as wanting to bring him to St James's Park because he'd done so well with us on that loan spell, but we'd managed to keep him permanently. But then a couple of years later, after this day that we got, it's exactly the same date. So 2 years after this promotion news, we'd just been at Wembley for the cup final, captained by Paul Bracewell and Gary Bennett had an indiscretion on not turning up for a pre-season tour. Paul Bracewell had captained the side to Wembley, and Bob Murray made a decision not to offer him a 2-year contract, I think.
Well, that's it. Because, like you said, I mean, to be fair, he only played for us, as you said, because he had 2 years out pretty much with that ankle problem. And he told us that, you know, after that, he only had 50% movement in one of his ankles, which is ridiculous when you think about what he still did in his career after that. But but you mentioned him joining us, Martin. Actually, you know, when we spoke to him, he said that he knew he wasn't going to get games at Everton, and he was kind of looking around. And with his links, as you said, with the Stoke links, he actually gave Dennis Smith a call and said, "Would it be all right if I came up and played for you?" And Dennis Smith went, "Well, we're skint, so I'll take you on loan." And as you said, he basically started to run the show. And Dennis Smith was thinking, right, well, we have to get him in. And as Bracewell describes all of his medicals after this point, he absolutely, completely failed his medical. And Dennis Smith just went, "Are you feeling all right?" He went, "Yes, Gaffer." He went, "That's good enough for me." And then basically that was it. He signed for 250,000. And as we talked about, he helped us get that promotion. But we did come straight back down, even though Bob Murray had negotiated only 2 relegation places. And we still, unfortunately, went down. There was only 2 who went down, and we went down, so potentially deserved it in some ways. But the 91-92 season was a really strange season because, you know, Dennis Smith had getting that feel-good factor back, took us back up from the 3rd division, back up to the 1st division. And then we had that relegation where we played some really good stuff, and we kind of made some there was a lot of media pundits saying we were a good side that year with the football we played. Remember the game away to Spurs, Martin, particularly?
Oh, it was one of those relegation seasons where we actually played really, really well. And even when we went down, obviously everyone was disappointed and upset because we thought we deserved to stay up, but it was a real feeling that we were on the verge of kind of just being a really good side. And that summer we managed to keep hold of everybody who we want to keep hold of. We didn't lose anyone of any significance. And you kind of think this is just kind of that little part of the course to then go on to that next step. Because that team that we had was so good. And that season, that relegation season as well, We had Pasco out for a long time. Gabby Adini was out for a long time. People like
Davenport
David
was injured a bit.
People like David Rush had to come in and do a job. Kieran Brady came in and
Warren Hawke
did a job. Warren Hawke, people like that. So we really kind of struggled.
Paul William at Old Trafford.
He did play. He did.
When he got absolutely tore apart by Lee Sharp and was never seen again.
Dragged off at half time, and that was. Well, actually, I think if my memory serves me correctly, Paul Williams started the first game of that next season at home in Derby.
In Derby, in a draw, 0-0 or 1-1. Can't remember.
1-1, I think.
1-1. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Martin.
But no, I just think, for context, that next season was one that we approached having, on a feel-good factor. Even though we got relegated, we thought, right, this is the next, next bounce up, next step up.
Absolutely, and we had that kind of expectation, because actually I did the stats once on that relegation season, and I'll dig the piece out somewhere. But someone can go back, and if you go look at that relegation season, how many times we took the lead and took nothing from the game is incredible. Yeah. And I remember, if you read Dennis Smith in his book, I think he says a lot about. I think it was Gary Bennett going wandering during games and trusting him at centre half. But then you look at the Man United game, and he went wandering and flicked it over Gary Pallister and smashed it in the bottom corner. Yeah. So works both ways, doesn't it? But like I said, that 91-92 season, really strange one, because as Martin said, the expectation was that we'd go back up. We thought we've got a good side. Marco Gabbiadini was banging the goals in. We had the likes of Armstrong, who was still really young. We had Kevin Ball in his prime, and we just thought we'd be in the mix for promotion. But then in September, we sold Marco Gabbiadini to Crystal Palace for 1.8 million. And it was at this point, because Dennis Smith had never really had any money to freshen things up. And he decided this is how we had to freshen things up. He had to bring some money in, and Marco Gabbiadini was the biggest asset we had on the book. So we took 1.8 million. Palace needed a replacement for Ian Wright, who'd gone to Arsenal, and they decided it was going to be Gabbiadini. So Dennis Smith got the chance to spend this money in the first half of that season. John Byrne came in from Brighton, Don Goodman from West Brom. As we mentioned earlier, it was kind of big money for Sunderland at the time in terms of that Goodman deal. And Anton Rogan came in from Celtic. But then we were struggling. We were at the wrong end of the table. And just after Christmas, potentially harshly treated, if you like, and we've touched on this before, but he was sacked after a 3-0 defeat at Oxford. So this is when Malcolm Crosby took over the reins. And this, he was told, and go back, we did a podcast with Malcolm Crosby recently, and you can listen to everything he talks about, the position he was put in. But it was essentially, Bob Murray was trying to get Neil Warnock out of Notts County, and he said he spoke to Neil Warnock years later, and that was how it was going to be. And basically, he was told, right, just hang fire, we'll make an appointment. And then actually, he was talking to Dennis Smith, because Dennis Smith had gone to Bristol City, and he was going to go there to join him at his number 2. But I say unfortunately, but in the meantime, Malcolm Crosby managed somehow to get us to the FA Cup final. Even though our league form was absolutely atrocious. And in the end, as this went on, Neil Warnock said, because actually he'd played with Malcolm Crosby when they were both players, and he said, no, he's a mate. I'm not stepping on his toes while he's going through that cup run. And in the end, it was almost kind of begrudgingly that Bob Murray gave Malcolm Crosby a permanent contract before the cup final, because Bob Murray really didn't want to appoint Malcolm Crosby as manager permanently, and only ended up giving him a 1-year contract, which kind of started the ball rolling in terms of uncertainty at the club. And as it turned out, we'll avoid talking about John Byrne's chances in the first half, but we ended up getting well beaten by Liverpool 2-0. But while all of this is going on, Paul Bracewell's contract is running down, and it's going to be up in the summer just after the FA Cup final. And in the days before the Bosman ruling, clubs had to offer a player a contract by the 3rd Saturday in May, which pretty much fell on the day of the cup final in this case. So as Bracewell kind of explained to us on the podcast when he talked to us, he returned from the FA Cup final to find a letter on the doorstep that had come through the post, which was a contract offer from Sunderland. Now, he's just about to turn 30 in July, and he's just played 49 games in that season. And almost we're pretty much an ever-present club captain as well, just captained his side to the FA Cup final. And this offer is offering him 1-year deal. and the manager's just been offered a 1-year deal. And he says, a turning 30-year-old, he said he wanted to play for Sunderland, but he wanted a better security. He says, well, he's about to turn 30. He's had these injuries. He could break down or whatever, but he's just played 49 games at the same time. So he said he actually took the letter back to the club personally and said, no, I'm rejecting this offer. You've only offered us 1 year. And that was it. And at the time, back again in the day, when you were out of contract like this and it ran over that time frame, your name was then circulated around all the other clubs to say that this player's out of contract, because you couldn't just leave the club. You were still at the club, and it went to a tribunal if another club came in and they had to decide a fee. And Paul Bracewell said people were calling him up, couldn't believe that his name was on this list. Said, is this true? Is this actually right? And he said, yeah, I'm a free agent. And it was someone from Liverpool who rang him who said, right, give us a bit of time if this is true. And he said the next phone call he had was from Kevin Keegan, who had taken over towards the end of the season before at Newcastle. And Newcastle were ready to spend the bucks and we knew what was happening there. But he stepped in and went, yeah, I know what you like. I know you. Do you want a 3-year contract? And Paul Bracewell went, absolutely. And he went, are you bothered about moving across? And he went, I want somewhere to play. I need security. And he went, right, no problem. We'll get it sorted. Now, it started at this point, it went to the tribunal to set the fee. Newcastle argued at this point that they should pay slightly less than the $250,000 that we paid for Everton a couple of years earlier, because he was that bit older and whatever. And Bob Murray, so they wanted to pay $200,000, and Bob Murray thought they should pay way more because he was our club captain and blah, blah, blah. In the end, the tribunal said, well, if he was that important to you, you would offer him a more than a 1-year contract. So they set the fee at $250,000, which was exactly what we paid for Everton a couple of years earlier. Bob Murray was absolutely fuming, and it was in the local papers at the time that he requested clear the air talks with Sir John Hall, because he said the move by Newcastle was opportunistic. That's how he described it. But Newcastle United Deputy Chief Executive, as he was then, Freddie Fletcher, insisted they'd done nothing to break any rules in making the transfer. He said there was nothing unethical in what we did. Paul Bracewell was a free agent and his name was circulated with a list of players that were available. It was up to Sunderland to make him an acceptable offer before he was put on the list. We don't make the rules, but we abide by them. Sir John Hall is abroad at the moment, but I am sure he'd be happy to meet Bob Murray if Sunderland want to discuss the way we have handled things. Now, Paul Bracewell went on to take Newcastle up and played for them in the Premier League for 2 years, then came back to us and took us up again, and then played for us in the Premier League for another year. So if you see it in the context of what happened next, I mean, look, as much as I'd like to rant and rave about Newcastle and blah, 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 they've done nothing wrong in this case, and neither did Paul Bracewell, really. And you can only blame Sunderland as a football club for being run as a basket case at the time for all of this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely! Like, he was such an important player for us, wasn't he? And the dagger through the heart with all of this. I remember hearing the news on the radio. I must have been off school sick or something. I remember playing Championship Manager. I was sat playing Championship Manager. I had Metro Radio on, and on the news it came on that he'd signed for Newcastle. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah,
I spent that caused another few days off school. But then I remember the first game of the season, because he hadn't scored. Oh, sorry, he'd scored. I think he scored 2 goals for us in his second spell. And he scored 2 belters, one away at Stoke and one at Sheffield United. And I think that had been in his first season. He hadn't scored in the 2 seasons after that. And I remember I was sat in the car park outside Presto in concert with my dad, and we had the football on. And Newcastle were playing Southend, and about 3 or 4 minutes into his bloody debut, he rakes this left foot volley into the top corner, doesn't he, to announce himself to the Gallagher end. You just say, oh, shit, man. That was the absolute dagger through the heart with Paul Bracewell's move. Even in hindsight, the move I can kind of accept, him scoring a left foot volley into the top corner 3 or 4 minutes into the debut. I can't. I still struggle to.
You need to let it go, Martin. Let it go.
I don't think I ever will, mate.
He was a great player for us, though.
Oh, superb.
Yeah.
Superb player.
Was there any, can you remember, was there any fallout when Bracewell came back then? Or was Murray happy to welcome him with open arms when Peter Reid got him back to Sunderland? I can't remember.
He said on the podcast that, because I said, was any word said, did you turn around and, because he probably would have been well within his rights to, when he came back, to say, oh yeah, I'm back and I've just played 2 seasons in the Premier League and won another second tier title. But yeah, he's just said, no, he said he wasn't like that in terms of grudges or anything. Nothing was said. And I think he was offered a longer contract. What was it, 5 years later or 3 or 4 years later than he was?
Right, it would have been. But at that point, I think Bob Murray would have done anything Peter Reid had told him to do, really. So I think there was that. And look, for all we've talked about Bob liking to kind of paint his own version of history, even he can't look back and go, oh, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It
ties in. We did a podcast with John Ficklin, and it was a bit of an eye opener when John Ficklin said, because he arrived at the club in terms of being on the board in early '95, wasn't it? Because his original investment got spent on Brett Angel. 94 was it? Because his original investment, he ploughed 700 grand into the club, and it all went on Brett Angel, so he was over the moon with that. But he said that he was really shocked when he came to the club because Bob Murray had talked him into investing and being on the board. And he said he was really surprised when he walked in the club because he'd always just been a fan from the outside and thought, oh, this is Sunderland, it's a grand institution. And then when he got on the inside, he said it looked more like a social club when he was on the inside, the way it was run. And you look at this, whether we thought, I don't know whether we thought we could do things on the cheap or what, but it ties in as well because if you read, there's something really, one of the biggest things I think in Dennis Smith's book about this time and how Newcastle started to do what they did. He went to a reserve game. He was watching a player, I think, at St. James's Park, and he tells the story how he got talking to Sir John Hall, who'd just taken over Newcastle at the time. And he said that Sir John Hall was telling them all these things that were going to happen in terms of the Premier League. And he said, I'm getting Newcastle United ready, and this Premier League is going to take off, and it's going to be separate to the Football League, and we're going to create different rules. And Dennis Smith said, he was like, that can't happen because of the rules of the Football League and blah, blah, blah. And so John Hall just looked at him and said, we'll change the rules. Mm-hmm. And Dennis Smith kind of realised that these type of people were going to change football completely. Mm-hmm. But we but we didn't have the foresight to see this. And we've just been talking about the 1990 promotion. Like, if we'd taken advantage of that, we could have potentially been one of those teams who were in that first Premier League and then started to pick up the money and then being well established and being able to kick on. But we didn't have the foresight to see what was happening in football. And this was another example of how we were run, and we weren't aiming to kick on, and as Martin said earlier, to kick on and be that established side. We were trying to, like I said, we were probably doing open the box and stuff like that on the weekend, like the local social club and stuff like that.
We were trying to wing it with Brett Angel. That's what we were trying to do. It was a terrible, terrible time. That you did just feel like we were being left behind. It did feel like that. It was a horrible feeling, that watching all that going on up the road, and all the talk about the Prem and stuff like that, was, you're just thinking we're going in the wrong direction. Here. Not a very good time, that time.
Kelvin, that church priest, I bet he liked Angel, did he? Sorry.
Get worse before they get better. I was just going to say that, Kelvin, you did mention about Bracewell, and I have to admit I'm a bit biased because he's one of my favourite of Sunderland players that I've ever seen in a Sunderland strip. And I think twice in a decade, he dragged us into the top flight, I think. I mean, I just think he was the final jigsaw, I think, in that Dennis Smith side. And he was pretty much the only piece that Peter Reid added to that promotion side in 95, 96. And I think he came in, I mean, you're talking 4 years down the line and he was already had these horrific injuries. But even when he came in with Reid, I think for the first 3 or 4 years in there, he won Player of the Month. And he just kind of ran the show then. I mean, he was, I think if he doesn't get those injuries that Martin talked about earlier, he's getting 60, 70 England caps, no problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic player. Fantastic. And a real galvanizer as well. It wasn't just what he did. I thought he galvanized everybody else round about him. He was like an inspiration on the pitch, especially to some of them young lads that he played with.
No, it was quite a young team, wasn't it?
Yeah, he came back as a coach as well, didn't he?
He was coach for quite a while.
Initially with like the younger players, and then was he even first team coach?
Well, I think Dick Advocat brought him into the sort of first team coaching setup, didn't he? Then he stayed there under Allardyce and Moyes and people like that. So he only left when Moyes left, I think, from memory.
Yeah. Again, though, it just shows what Kelvin said about how he's an important voice and he would galvanise the club. So that goes to prove it, that the fact that all those managers wanted him around as a coach as well.
Well, and that's
Spurs, wasn't he?
He was technical. I think he was like a technical manager, kind of, or development manager or something at Spurs. I think.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
He'll be due a return, is he?
It's about time.
Yeah.
Get promoted, bring Brace back.
Yeah.
I remember when he came back for the third spell, I bought an A Love Supreme t-shirt. It just had Le Brace is Ace on it. And that was
nice.
That was a cracker. That'll be still somewhere. I've got my John K fan club t-shirt. I found that the other day. So the Paul Bracewell one will be knocking around somewhere.
No fuss with the ruts. I remember that.
Yes.
That's right. There's some good ones. 14 years after that decision not to give Paul Bracewell more than 12 months, Bob Murray resigned as chairman. And that might or might not be able to be traced back to something that happened exactly 365 days earlier, because on that day in 2005, Kelvin Davis arrived from Ipswich, which was the start of a disastrous spell. And I reckon he's like, I know we've had Lee Camp and Jason Steele and people like that, but Kelvin Davis is like the worst goalkeeper that I had the higher expectation for.
Oh, I suppose expectation, but he wasn't as bad as Lee Camp.
He wasn't.
He's the worst keeper I've seen.
When you're going up, you get rid of Mark Poom and Thomas Myra, and you think, this lad who we're bringing in must be good. He was a dope.
The thing is, he was a good keeper.
Right.
Well,
not that I saw, mate.
No, but this is the thing. You watch him in his career anywhere else, and you go, he's a good keeper. Then he comes to Sunderland and just falls apart.
Well, remember,
I want to
go on.
My take on that was, I don't think he could play in front of a big crowd, mate. He just looked, the very first time he came out, looking at him, he just looked nervous, and it just got worse for him. But he did go on. I mean, he made some fantastic saves and offered sterling service to the other clubs he played for. He's just one of them guys that never did it for us. Such a nice first name as well. I was rooting for him, but he was just one of them lads that just from the very start, it just didn't work for him.
No, you could tell it wasn't going to fit. And even that, it was Charlton that we played on the opening day of the season. Darren Bent scored a goal where he hit it across him, and he just didn't get down to it. And you just think, again, like a decent keeper saves that. And then it was Matt Taylor, wasn't it, for Portsmouth, who lobbed him from the halfway line, and I think that was kind of that was it. I think Ben Annick came into goal shortly afterwards, didn't he? Talking about players who kept coming back, we talked about Paul Bracewell in his, I think, 4 spells at the club. On the 15th of June 1979, Pop Robson came back to the club from West Ham. That was the second of 3 spells I think he had as a player at Sunderland. And he, of course, was part of Peter Reid's backroom staff as well, and was chief scout for a period of time too. So lots of connections there. But for the last big thing we're going to talk about today, we're going back to 1975. And actually, this person is the first football autograph I ever got. I got his autograph outside of the main stand of Roker Park in 1988, before a game at home against Notts County. We drew 1-1, Marco scored. It was one of those, my dad's like, go and get his autograph. And I'm like, who is he? He goes, doesn't matter, just go and get it. And this fella, who's obviously just finished playing a year or two beforehand, was striding up to the main stand to go and watch the match. But yes, on the 13th of June, 1975, just 2 years after winning the FA Cup, Dave Watson is sold to Man City, Kelvin.
He is. And what a shame. It was a big statement about that 1973 Cup final team breaking up. With already Tuitt and Horswell had gone, and then Dave Watson goes. We got 175,000 and Jeff Clark for him, and I'm not suggesting to anybody that's listening that Clark and Watson were of a similar caliber. I'm certainly not suggesting that, but Jeff Clark never let me down as a player. I think he was a wholehearted, reasonably skillful centre half who did business for us. So in the long term, it wasn't that bad a deal. But at the time, I would probably describe myself as broken-hearted about that transfer, without realising everything that was going on behind the scenes. He was our first 100,000 signing in 1970, and he came as a centre forward. Alan Brown bought him, and they had a pretty good relationship. I hadn't realised until recently that when Dave Watson first came to the club, he actually lived with Alan Brown when he first came, whilst he was looking for a house for him and his wife. So they had a pretty good relationship, him and Brownie. He signed from Rotherham. Tommy Doherty was the manager at Rotherham. He was there for a short while. Doherty took him to Rotherham from Notts County, and Dave Watson reckoned that the training under Doherty was the hardest training that he'd ever done, and it got him really, really fit. And when he came, I can remember when he came, and I was sort of knew about him, but he there was a lot of people who were saying, well, who is this boy for £100,000? Who is he? Is he going to be any good? And right from the start, he was an absolute athlete. He was ripped. He had quads that Arnie Schwarzenegger would have died for. There wasn't an ounce of fat on him. He was, yeah.
How did your mum feel about him?
I think he was, she still had eyes for Charlie and Colin Granger. I think Watson she was getting on a bit by then, Very good. I'll ask her. I never asked her. I stopped asking her. He just was an athlete, and you could see that he could play football, but came into a team that kind of, if I said to you, was evolving. The team definitely got better, and results got better after he came. Dick Malone had come just before him, but remember, he's playing up front. Brownie sees him as playing up front. He ends up making 209 appearances for us. He scores 33 goals in that time. That's a goal every 6 games on average. You know, when Brown goes on gardening leave, Billy Elliott moves him back to centre half. Now, we'd played a few games at centre half for both County and Rotherham, but he likes it back there. That's where he wants to play. He sees himself as a centre half, not a centre forward, but he loves we're talking about a centre half who like to dander up. He loved to get forward. He loved to attack, you know, and you could see that in his play early on. We're talking about Bracewell there being an inspiration. It didn't take Dave Watson too long before you could see he was an inspiration. He was fearless. I mean, the words that people use to describe him: fearless, gladiatorial, an athlete, a colossus. You know, these were all words that came out in the cup final run, but he was doing that from when he first came in 1970. It didn't take him too long to get going on the pitch. Fine player. Canny up front, canny with holding the ball up. You know, he was canny at that. Great in the air. He had this offensively. He had this ability. We're talking about it last week. This ability to seemingly hover. You know, he would be head and shoulders above people sometimes, going for the ball in an attacking sense. He had a brilliant leap on him. I think everybody calls him Big Dave Watson. A lot of people called him Big Dave Watson. He was only 6 foot. He just seemed bigger because of his prodigious, his ability to get up and to hover. He did just seem bigger. Fantastic in the air. Would out jump bigger centre forwards. You know, when he went back to centre half, he was out jumping far bigger lads. Hard as nails as well. His appearance stats for us were. Whenever we're talking about Dave Watson, I think I saw something one time. I must admit I've never 100% checked this out, but I think he in his time with us, 4.5 seasons, he could have played 189 league games. He could have played. He only missed 12 in 4.5 seasons. He was a fantastically fit lad, and just a real inspiration on the pitch. He could play. He could kick with both feet. He was predominantly right-footed, but he had 2 feet, and could play. He loved taking the ball out of defence. The crowd really, the Roker crowd really latched onto this when he would get the ball and shimmy to boot it away, and then space would open up in front of him, and geez, off he would go with the ball. It was like a big redwood tree sprinting. You know, it was something else to see him going forward like that. He's a canny passer of the ball as well, and he was quick. He was deceptively quick. He didn't always look. He was one of these characters that didn't always look like he was moving quick, but he was beating lads who you knew that were quick to the ball. Fantastic buy for us. Brilliant. Billy Elliott moving back to centre half and keep him there. And then Stoko, you've got to give him credit. He sees him at centre half. Of course, Stoko's a centre half himself, and he says, we're going to keep him at centre half. And by and large, he does do that. There's a couple of games in the cup run where Stoko moves him up to apply a bit of pressure. I remember, I think Notts County in the second leg down there, he went up and at Reading, and then when we were 3 goals up at half time in the in that FA Cup tie, and Redden got a lucky penalty, and he moved Watson back from his centre forward position to bolster the defence. He was just inspirational. I saw a lot of his games for Sunderland, home and away, and I can never think of a time where he didn't give you 100%. He was absolutely up for the game, so focused. And the chant of Watson England used to bark out from the Fulwell end. That actually started before the FA Cup run in 1973. I think we thought we had a cracking player on our hands, but the FA Cup run gave him his platform, and there wasn't Man City. Look at the big teams we played: Man City, Arsenal, Leeds. There wasn't one of them games where he wasn't either man of the match. There's always a debate about the cup final and Jimmy Monty's double save, but for me, he was man of the match in the cup final as well. There wasn't a top class team that he didn't do business against in that cup run. Never missed a game in the cup run. Played all 9 games and was our joint top scorer in the 1973 cup run as well. Fantastic character on the pitch to have about, and an inspiration to other players round about him. Davy Watson, my God, I was gutted when he went. I thought he was going to the right team. If you can swallow your bile at him leaving, I thought, Man City, they were a pretty good team at the time, Man City. I think they'd finished second to Liverpool the season before he went, and I thought, you know what, he's gonna talk City off there. He's going to do the business for them, but absolutely gutted when he left.
Kelvin?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, you were saying obviously you were absolutely gutted, but with his age, because I was just looking, and he was 28, about to turn 29, I was looking. I mean, would you say he was he, because he'd only been playing centre-half for a few years at that point, would you say he was actually in his prime?
Absolutely. And I think that is a fact. It's an oft forgotten fact. He started late. His career started late, because when he left school, he worked on a farm for a year and then went and did a 3-year electrical apprenticeship. He signed for Notts County when he was 21. So he was a late starter in terms of his professional career. And then, as you say, he's coming up 29 before he plays a first division game, because he played. All his time with us was spent in the second division. He'd 14 England caps by the time he left. He was somebody who'd already made his mark from 1974. I think he got pulled into the England squad. So he had 14 caps, and definitely a late developer in the sense of getting started, and as a centre half, totally coming into his prime. There were some great centre halves around at the time as well. Your Roy McFarlane's. One of the things I always regret is, you only played 4 games with Colin Todd. And those 4 games, he played centre forward. And I always think that was a sliding door moment. If we could have hung on to Todd or not sold him to Cloughie, what might have happened, would Todd and Watson have formed the hinge of our defence for years to come. But they only played 4 games together, and that was him away. In terms of coming into his prime as a centre half, one thing I would say to you is 48 of his 65 England caps were earned after he was 30 years old. So you're right, Chris. I think centre halves do develop. Some of them do develop, but you're concerned when they get to that age, are they losing a bit of pace he was still quick over the ground and still had this prodigious leap on him. And I know I've said this, but absolutely fearless.
Can I ask about that move? Was he that bad a centre forward? Or I think it was Billy Elliott who moved him. Did he just see how good he could be at centre half?
I always remember it's funny where you get information from. I remember interviewing another young lad who's got an anniversary in this period we're talking about, Chico Hamilton. And as a young player at the time, he told me, because he was at the club at the same time as Watson, he said that Bob Stokoe, Alan Brown, Billy Elliott had all said to him and his younger teammates that Dave Watson would play for England at centre-half. So I think there was a feeling abroad that centre-half was his position and, that's where he would settle. I suspect because he was such a good all-round player, and we definitely we didn't have that kind of centre-forward at the club. We didn't have a big battering ram of the centre forward. I suspect that he was just good enough to be able to go and slot in there. Dave Watson was a kind of athlete. I mean, I always say this about him. He could have played any sport. He's going to be one of them aggravating boys that could have played any position and probably could have played any sport.
It's interesting you say there, Kelvin. He's just an athlete. The stat you gave there about him only missing a handful of league games, the stat about him playing for England so much in his 30s, I think as well as being an athlete and naturally very fit, from what I can gather, he looked after himself off the pitch. He's a very physical player and yet he's always fit. And as I say, he did things right in an era when there was still a big drinking culture. From what I can gather, he was quite...
True.
He married young, settled down with his wife, and he very professional from what I understand as well.
Yeah, very. And I will say to you, that was one of the things that Chico Hamilton said to us as a young guy. He said Jimmy Montgomery and Davy Watson were the consummate professionals at the club. He said, yeah, you couldn't help but learn. They were great role models. And I don't think Watson he wasn't a great drinker. He wasn't a great carouser. He's a big fan of status quo. He loved the rock and roll music and ended up being great pals with them.
Did he like it and like it, Kelvin?
He had to pull a few strings to get tickets for their concerts, but he loved all that. Just, he's one of those players, a bit like Bracewell. I'll look back on all the players I've seen. I'm just so privileged to have seen that lad play football in our colours. Just so privileged. He was somebody who deserved everything that he got out of the game, because he never let anybody down. Such a fantastic player. The 73 Cup run gave him a massive platform, but he was absolutely brilliant in that Cup run. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic player. Just looking back, there's stuff that went on at the time when he was with the club. There was a difficulty for all of the time that he was at the club between his wife and one of the other wives at the club, and the 4.5 years there was a background of this kind of I think Bob Stokoe called it a domestic issue once. I know there's a great story in Penny Watson's book, My Dear Watson. Stokoe, trying to do the right thing, had said to the press one day, there are some domestic issues that we're trying to deal with. And all the press rushed round to Watson's house, Davy Watson's house, thinking that him and Penny were getting a divorce or something. And it wasn't anything like that. So there was this background stuff going on that definitely can be a bit unsettling when things aren't, you don't want that kind of thing going on if other things on the pitch and what have you aren't going right and not getting promotion, would he have stayed if we'd got promotion? I don't know. I think that issue would have needed resolving in some way for him, because he was very aware that his wife was struggling with that. So, that needed to change for him to stay. And when we didn't get promotion, and then there was a little bit, him and Stoke had always gotten on all right. But then towards the finish of his time, there was some tension between the two of them, whether this had anything to do with Bob Stokoe's health or what have you. But, he'd put 2 transfer requests in, and the first one was just denied. Stokoe said no, and the board backed him. And then the second one, Stokoe kind of went, I can remember all this playing out in the papers. Stokoe kind of told the press that Davy Watson would be sweeping the corridors. It was a comment like that before he went anywhere else. He'd be sweeping the corridors, and if any of these lads left the club, he'd jump off the pier. That was how sort of seriously Stokoe felt about the situation with these players asking for transfers. There was quite a bit of an undercurrent at the time about salary and wages and stuff like that going on. But there was a salary embargo as well that was cutting the club felt that they weren't able to boost the salaries too much for players because of there was kind of a national embargo during the coming out of the cup final into 73, 74. And I think that left a bit of a taste. But he enjoyed he did well he did really well during the cup run. He enjoyed Europe. He played really well in that. We had a fantastic League Cup run in the League Cup, and a marvellous game against Derby County, star-studded Derby County team at Roker with the place full, midweek game, shades of the Man City tie the year before, and he was fantastic in that as well. He loved the big stage in a sort of, I'm going to say it here, in an almost humble kind of way. He wasn't like doing handstands, and he wasn't a showboaty kind of character. But every time you stuck him on the big stage, geez, he just came through. He wasn't really, he didn't seem to be intimidated by the big stage and by big players. In fact, he seemed to look upon it as a great challenge, and he would just get on and give you his game, We're a real privilege to see him play in our colours.
Listening to you, Kelvin, I mean, I genuinely love this time of the week, when we gather around the campfire, toasting marshmallows and just listening to you talk about those sort of players that, that I really wished I would have been able to have seen play in the flesh, because you see the cup final and things like that, but week after week after week, there's these, and my dad told me stories about Len Shackleton, and I used to imagine that, and, Jimmy Montgomery and goal, seeing him do saves week in, week out, and listening to you almost put yourself in the place. I mean, it's brilliant when you hear people talk about players they saw week in, week out, because other people might say it, they were unbelievable and all this, but when you see them, because we look on, Quinn and Phillips or whatever, but, people might look on Quinn years to come, and I remember seeing Quinn, and I remember seeing when he joined, and he had his troubles, but we remember that, and you remember his flaws sometimes as well as the brilliant performances.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, Paul Bracewell, Dave Watson, fantastic. He made a goal scoring debut against Watford away. And then I saw his first game at home, and that's one of the things when you're talking, Chris, you kind of, when you see a player's first game and you see them all the way through to the last game, you don't always know when it's going to be the last game. But, you do so, especially when they've been great players like Bracewell, like Watson. We're talking about Charlie Hurley earlier. I didn't see his first game or his last game, but I saw quite a few of them in between. And you sort of, as a fan, you start to they feel like part of your family, part of your football family. And Davy Watson, definitely right in there. Right in there. I'd be inviting him to me Christmas dinner round the Christmas table if I thought he would come. Fantastic character and servant to the club in the time that he was here. I was disappointed looking back on it. I was disappointed when he went, but I was sorry looking back on his time with us to hear about the background stuff that had gone on. We as a fan base were proud as punch of him when he got his England cap, I can always remember the crowd, the Fulwell end used to really go at it, and it was quite a complicated chant, which went something like, Watson, England, Watson, England. But it went on and on and on, and if he did anything on the pitch, and he did loads of stuff, it would just start up again. A bit like the way now we go Hume. Every time Hume makes a tackle, it was a bit like that with Watson. He could trigger the crowd by just, sticking a tackle in or a header or anything like that. A real privilege, and I'm repeating myself there, but it really was a real privilege to see him play. If you think about the cup run as well, Richie Pitt and him there. I mean, Richie Pitt was on his way out the club. Stoker was going to sell him to Arsenal and tried to sell him to Arsenal. And it was
he went on loan, didn't he, Kelvin?
He was on the way. Yeah, he was. He was on the way. He looked like he didn't have a future under Stoker. There's a little bit of theme there that I might come back to as well. But he was a young centre half who had come in and, had done really well. He was a goal scorer in centre half in his first full season. I think he scored about 6 goals, Pitt, and was quite popular with the fans. He'd come in and but Stoker didn't fancy him and was looking to ship him out. And then there was, I can't remember, I think David Young got injured for the Reading game, and Stoker put him in. He was shipping, I tell you, he was shipping out. He was trying to get, I think Keith Coleman and Richie Pitt were going on loan to Arsenal. And Pitt might have been going back on loan to Arsenal. And he ended up the Reading away game in the cup run. There were injuries, and Coleman sat on the bench, and Pitt played in defence. And one of the reasons Stoker did that was he wanted to cup tie them before they went to Arsenal, so that they wouldn't play against us. And but also that allowed, although Davy Watson was playing up front, Stoker got a good look at Pitt, and then when he dropped Watson back, he thought they made a good pair, so they ended up playing together.
And he scored. It was his hometown club in the third round, wasn't it, Notts County? And he said all his family were in the stands supporting Notts County. But he scored, didn't he? They nearly knocked us out in that third round, didn't they?
We were lucky. I was at that game. County away, we were very, very lucky to get out of there with a draw. And I think there was a canny Sunderland following down for that game. And I didn't, you know how sometimes you hear the crack when you're walking to your van or your bus or whatever, and nobody on our bus thought that we'd dominated the game and that they were lucky. We were very, very lucky to get away from there with the draw, but Watson did the business. And I mean, there were 2 things that happened that day, and didn't this become a theme? Jimmy Montgomery made a save in that game to keep the game at 1-0, and it was a save that I think Montgomery himself reckons was better than better than the cup final save. And Watson, he had a stormer. He went up front and scored, and really kept us in a game that we could have easily lost. They were a canny team, County. They had some good players playing in that team. I don't know if you can ever remember a lad called Don Masson, who played for County and QPR. I think he went to. He was a Scotland international. He was a cracking midfield player. Him and Les Brad used to play up front for them. He was a centre forward that knew how to create a bit of space for himself and others. Like he was a wily player. Him, Don Masson, I always fancied him for us. I always wanted us to buy him. I thought he was a cracking player. So they were a good team. And we nearly went out, but you're right. That's the area he's from. His brother, he had a brother that played. His brother played for Forest and Southend, Peter. And I think he still lives in I'm going to say it is Stapleford, but the Nottingham area. I think they still live down there. So yeah, Notts County, and then Keith Pring, Doc bought him for a player. He swapped him for a player called Keith Pring and £8,000 and took him to Rotherham. And then he was playing, he plays centre half one week, centre forward the next. He just played where there was gaps. He was still, I think he'd only be about 22 or something then. And it is, as I said earlier, Watson always rated Doherty as an excellent, innovative and excellent sort of man manager and trainer. Got him really fit and kind of set him up for his career, really, I think.
I think it's an interesting thing when you look back on his international career. You say Kelvin, he was 27, I think, when he made his England debut. And he was given his debut cap, his first cap, by Alf Ramsey. It was Alf Ramsey's last game in charge of England. So Alf Ramsey brought him into the international setup in 74. He plays all the way through. So I think 1982, he plays his last game for England just before the World Cup in Spain. Now, Ron Greenwood left him out of the squad for the World Cup. So, you're talking about a 35, 36-year-old centre-half who's amassed 65 caps in this period of time over 8 years with England. Ron Greenwood leaves him out of the squad, only taking 3 centre-halves to the Spain World Cup. Phil Thompson, Steve Foster, and one with a future Sunderland connection, Terry Butcher. Mm-hmm. We didn't qualify for the 78 World Cup. In the group stages, we got the same amount of points as Italy. Now, I don't know whether it went on goal difference or went on head-to-head, but Italy went through and we missed out, so we didn't go to Argentina in 78. So Watson has I was going to say unenviable record, but it's not an unenviable one really, but he's the most capped England player never to play in a World Cup finals game, which is quite a remarkable record, really, given that he actually didn't miss a game for about 4 or 5 years in that spell.
It's a savage. 65 caps is great. I always remember he beat Bobby Moore's continuous games record. Bobby Moore had a 27 games continuous for England, and I think Watson got 33.
Yeah, so he didn't miss a game in 4 years. He played every game in 4 years for England.
Yeah.
78.
He did suffer a bit under Don Revie. When Revie got the job for some reason, and I know, as I say, I was reading his wife's books, and she had something to say about that in there, that he was never sure what he did to upset Revie, he was a complex character, Don Revie. He was that's another label for he was a funny bugger. Revie, he could be funny with people, and he never explained to Watson why he dropped him, because then he brought him back in again, but never offered any explanation for that. And Watson just came back in and got on with it, although he was tempted to tell Revy where to stuff his invitation. And I think apparently it was his wife that persuaded him. His wife and Tony Book persuaded him to go and, to crack on again, which he did do. He gives them credit for, getting him to swallow his ire at Revy and just crack on with it. Fantastic. I mean, it's a shame never to have played at the World Cup for a player who obviously loved playing for England. He was a very proud Englishman who really loved playing for his country. And I think when the time came for him to stop playing, I think he knew that time was there as well, and was, for the sake of the country and the team, was, recognised that now's the time to just concentrate on what's left of me football career, But a fantastic, I mean, you probably know that I'm not an England fan. My team's Scotland, but every game I saw him, it was with mixed sort of feelings that I used to watch him playing against Scotland, because you knew what was coming. He's gonna roll in and give you 100%, and probably, it stands a good chance of stopping goals and scoring goals against you. I always had a bit mixed feelings about that when I was watching Scotland play England, and he was playing, but he was a very passionate England player, for sure. And what you saw him doing on Roker Park was what you saw him doing on the pitch for England. He just wholehearted, fearless, passionate, gladiatorial. He seemed to welcome the physical side of the game. He welcomed it, but he wasn't a dirty player by any stretch. He was just hard and really, really fit. And as Andrew said earlier, really looked after himself, not a big drinker, sensible eater, liked his sleep. He used to get to his bed and enjoyed his sleep and stuff, liked his home comforts, looked after himself. Fantastic, fantastic player. It's hard to speak about him, lads, without thinking about where he's at now. I mean, I think most people know that he was diagnosed with dementia in 2014, and his family made that public in 2020 in the hope that, they could encourage other players, other football players in the same position to seek help. Because I think they felt that they spent a year, I think 2013, there were signs that things weren't right. So in 2020, they went public on that. He's got a condition that's CTE. It's called chronic traumatic encephalitis. Is probably what he's got. I say probably because usually at the moment, I think it's still the case that you have to be deceased before that's 100% confirmed. So it's a difficult situation for him and his family that they find themselves in, and it's a regressive condition, a dementia condition, and year on year that just gets a little bit worse. I know recently we had the naming of the Jimmy Montgomery stand, and, the 73 boys were there, but he wasn't there. And I suspect that things are getting more and more difficult, for him. His daughter, Heather, she's making a film. She's doing a story, the film's called Forgotten, and it's the story of Big Dave Watson. And it's a film about, as she says, his incredible life and legacy of England's forgotten captain as he fights his toughest battle, is how that film's, the advertising around that film. I don't think it's that isn't quite out yet, but I've seen snippets of that, and there's a lot of good, your Kevin Keegans and people like that are all stepping in and talking about what he was like as a character and what it was like to play with him. So keep your eye out for that one coming out. There's so many great footballers from that era, aren't there, and from the era behind that have been struck down with dementia. You're 3.5 times more likely as a professional footballer to be diagnosed with dementia than your ordinary population, you know. So there's definitely something that needs to be done there with regards to that. And I think of him heading the ball. You know, I've said to you, prodigious leap, great in the air. That wasn't his only abilities, but you know, I think of him. He could head the ball sometimes harder than felt I could kick it. If you ever see his goal for us in the cup tie against Luton at the Roker end, that ball he heads the ball into the back of the net, and it absolutely balloons the net when he heads it. So this guy he wasn't gently dropping balls off his head onto somebody's foot. Everything he won for with gusto. Can you remember a centre half called Chris Nicholl? Played for Aston Villa and Southampton, and they played together at Southampton. And one of their, you know, Chris Nicholl was another lad that gave you 100% and liked to keep himself fit. And one of the things they used to do was go in the gym after training, and they would be in the gym themselves and they'd play a version of head tennis, but they used to stand at either end of the gym. Like basically the furthest ends, they'd both be one at one end, one at the other, throw the ball up in the air and nut it. And the other one would come in and either nut it back or catch it, throw it up and nut it back. So they were absolutely humping the ball the length of the gym as part of that training, you know. You just think about things like that and think that probably with a little bit of help, you know, we'll have to make sure that nobody else is doing that kind of thing, given everything that we know about repetitive head injury. You know, and I think that's one of the things one of the reasons why his family are pushing at the film, and hoping that they're going to be able to, avoid, that kind of thing. We've definitely started, but, there's still more to be done. But that's as his daughter Heather says, he's fighting his hardest fight, is what's going on now, for him. And you've really just given the kind of player he was for us and the kind of player he was for every team. I mean, I know that Man City fans, you know, what everything I've just said to you about him, you've got Man City fans that say exactly the same thing about him when he went to play for them. Legend with us, legend with them. Southampton fans, the same, you know, his time that he spent there. And you've just got to wish him all the best, really, haven't you? Him and his family, as the deal with that condition.
You certainly do,
Yep.
Kelvin. And our marshmallows are well and truly toasted now, so we're going to have to wrap it up for this week. So I want to say thank you to Chris, thank you to you, Kelvin, thank you to Andrew for another stroll back down memory lane. Andrew, do you want to quickly give a couple of clues as to who might be mentioned in next week's pod?
Yes, we started with Colin Granger, who was born on the 10th of June 1933, so he fell into this current week's episode, whereas the one we're going to be looking at next time signed for Sunderland in June 2005. Another midfielder from County Durham originally. He did play for Hartlepool United, but then moved out of the area before coming back to us, as I say, 22nd of June 2005. He may have arrived at the same time as Kelvin Davis. We mentioned him earlier on in the pod. He came to Sunderland at a similar time. And then when he left Sunderland, he went back to the club we got him from. So there's your hints for who's going to be featured next time.
For some reason, I'm thinking about Queen's song, but we'll leave that one there. So thank you for listening. Remember to keep an eye on all podcast feeds. We've got lots and lots of stuff coming your way over the next few days. and there's plenty of stuff to read on the website at rokerreport.sbnation.com. So until next week, it's goodbye from all of us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.